previous part of this HDR video tutorial, I was talking about halo artifacts, which are a common issue with HDR photography. Today I would like to talk about another issue related to HDR photography, which is noise. The reason why noise is a problem in HDR photography is because noise can be considered as some tiny details. If you use tone mapping, for example Details Enhancer in Photomatic Pro, tone mapping has the effect of enhancing local details. As I said, noise can be considered small details, so using tone mapper might in fact make the noise even stronger than it initially was. So it's essential to get rid of noise in the shooting phase and before loading photos to Photomatic Pro. So I will just give you 5 tips which should help you in achieving noise-free images. First, I would like to zoom in to this image. Everything looks fine from this zoom level, but as soon as I zoom in, you can notice a lot of noise. Both color and luma noise here and here. It really looks ugly from this magnification level. Okay? And we don't want something like this. So, tip number 1 is to shoot at your camera's lowest native ISO, which is typically either ISO 100 or ISO 200. Shooting at anything higher, like ISO 800 or, for example, ISO 1600, might result in a lot of noise. If you have noise in your source images, it will get transferred to the final image. Okay, so this was tip number 1, shoot at lowest ISO possible. Tip number 2 is to make sure to cover whole dynamic range of the scene. By this I mean that your brightest photo in your sequence should have shadows in midtones part of its histogram. For this photo you can see here, I used these 3 exposures, this, and this. Okay, this is the brightest photo, right? So let's take a look at its histogram, and you can notice that shadows are still in the shadows area. They should be somewhere here in the midtones part of its image histogram. Okay. The reason it's important is because it means that there is not enough information about darkest parts of the image. Let's zoom in to this brightest photo. Now everything looks fine, but as soon as you start to drag exposure in Lightroom, for instance, you notice a lot of noise. It means that brightest photo doesn't have enough information about darkest parts of the image, and noise from this image will get transferred, and in fact it did, to the final image. Okay. For the next photo, I took 5 exposures. It's the same photo, but with 5 exposures, and the noise is much less noticeable than it was previously. Let's take a look at the brightest photo from the sequence. Now, shadows are still not in the midtones part of the histogram, but it's better than it was previously. Let's take a look at histogram of previous shot photo. You see the peak here? We have a lot of shadows here, much fewer here. Finally, I took this image from 7 exposures. Okay, let's zoom in, and this image is virtually noise-free. Brightest photo from its sequence looks like this. Now, this is what I had in mind. There are no shadows anymore. Shadows were moved to the midtones part of the histogram. It means the photo has enough information about shadows, and noise won't get transferred to the final image because there is no noise in your source images. Okay, now finally let's compare the images. Okay, now the image on the left is the one from 7 exposures, the one on the right from 5 exposures. This one on the left had enough information about shadows, the one on the right didn't. Okay, and now also a comparison between photo from 3 exposures and photo from 7 exposures. Well, the difference is huge. The photo from 3 exposures had a lot of noise in the water area, and the one from 7 exposures don't have any. It's similarly about the HUD. Photo from 3 exposures have some ugly color noise, and the one from 7 exposures is very clean. Okay. So tip number 2 was to cover whole dynamic range of the scene and to make sure that that shadows are bright enough in the brightest image. Brightest image is used to properly expose shadows, so make sure there is enough information about them. Tip number 3 is to reduce noise prior to merging your photos to HDR in Photomatix Pro. If you have any noise in your source images, sometimes you don't have a way to shoot that with tripod, for instance, so you have to use higher ISO. If you have a lot of noise in your source images, it will get transferred to your final tone-mapped image. In order to avoid this, make sure to reduce noise either in Lightroom or Photoshop or in Photomatix Pro before loading your images, before merging them to HDR. This way, if you remove this noise, it won't get transferred to your final image, and your final image will be noise-free. Tip number 4 is to avoid apply sharpening before loading photos into Photomatix Pro. Again, sharpening might enhance any noise present in source images, so if noise gets enhanced before loading your photos to Photomatix Pro, you will have a lot of it in the final tone mapped image. You can sharpen your photos, of course, after tone mapping, and it's usually what I do. Tip number 5 is that for night photos or photos containing a lot of blue color, you might try using fusion method, for example, Fusion Natural or Fusion Real Estate. They are both present in Photomatix Pro 5. The way they work is that, in fact, they can reduce noise present in source images. I will talk about Fusion in later parts of this tutorial, but for now, bear in mind that if you have noise and you cannot get rid of it for any reason, then give Fusion a chance. Okay, I hope that these 5 easy-to-follow tips will help you in achieving noise-free tone-mapped images. Thank you for watching.